We'd like to welcome you to the virtual kitchen table. We are Haley from Taking a Kinder Path, Ashley from Ashley as Mama and Storytime Shelves, and myself, Erin, from Everlearning. We're gathering to have conversations about family life and home education, most specifically unschooling, which is sometimes known as self-directed education, or as I often refer to it, whole life learning. We'll be sharing experiences and ideas, learning as we go. We hope you'll pull a chair up to the table and join us. Welcome back to the virtual kitchen table. Morning, Ashley.
Morning.
And good afternoon, Haley, to you.
Hello. Hello.
It's looking so much sunnier there than it does.
Yeah, it's quite nice today.
Yeah. So we are talking today about self-directed learning beyond academics. So I think a lot of conversation about self-directed learning tends to be, well, there tend to be certain topics that are kind of like hot buttons. So reading and writing and math and sort of those areas that you can fit more easily into kind of a subject, a school subject or a subject area. And something that I kind of have just found interesting myself, just noticing it through our own family, is how many things that are not academic people still think of in kind of a schoolish way. So a lot of things that maybe families used to teach their children to do, or children just naturally learn to do at home, have kind of been, how can I put it, almost like contracted out for lessons. I was going to say lessonified. I don't know if there's a word, but it's like a lot of the things have become sort of a standard thing of childhood. So I would use like swimming lessons would be an example of that, where it's kind of something that's very common that your child would take swimming lessons. Something that's come up more recently for us, and I'll probably talk about it maybe a little bit more detail later in the conversation, but it's just around driving. There's just an assumption that those things have to kind of be contracted out to either lessons or maybe a private instructor. And sometimes that is what you want to do. Like sometimes either the child would like to do that, or that's just the most, that feels the most comfortable, or it's just the most practical thing to do. But what I started noticing is that when we started to do things ourselves, so maybe taking the lead more from readiness of the kids or their interest in something, and then partnering with them on those things, people were really surprised and sometimes really positively surprised, but have also gotten just some odd sort of surprising remarks at times. So one of the first areas that I think about is swimming. So I think around here, at least, and I don't know what it's like where either of you live, but here swimming lessons are pretty standard, and you move through these levels, and it's just kind of a known thing, and it's something very common that you would do. And so one of my kids was really quite fearful of the water, struggled with the water. His younger siblings were comfortable much earlier than he was. So that even when he was like 10 or 11, he really wasn't swimming, and they were. But it just was what it was, right? Like he had some sensory stuff and it just wasn't his thing. And then when he was 11, he decided he wanted to swim. And it's not like he'd never been in a pool, but it was more kind of, more sitting in the shallow end or kind of doing things that felt manageable to him. And so we had a homeschool phys ed class, like a gym class. And then there was open time in the pool after the gym class. And all his friends were swimming, his siblings were swimming, and he just became very determined that he was going to kind of move past this discomfort, and he wanted to learn to swim. And it was really pretty cool, actually. There were a couple of friends of his, like around the same age, 12, one was 12, one was 11. And they helped him. Like they all got in the pool together, and they kind of really kind of took on this role of him learning to swim, and they all kind of worked together on it. And then there was probably, I want to say about a week, a little bit over a week, maybe like 8 or 9 days, where he and I would go to that same pool later in the evening. So it was kind of like after things like swimming lessons and kind of public swimming was over, there would be like a lane swim, or the pool would just be open maybe for another hour, hour and a half. And so we were there at like 9:30 at night, and we just went like 8 or 9 nights in a row, and we just practiced stuff, and he just did what he was comfortable with, but he really did want to kind of push himself forward. And so really by the end of that week, he was swimming really well. Which makes sense. Super athletic person, like it really was the water. So once he kind of got comfortable with that, he actually became a really good swimmer. And then again, there was kind of another social opportunity, because after this would be maybe like 6 months later, and he had been swimming here and there, not a ton, but here and there. And there was an opportunity to do swim lessons, and he wanted to do them because everybody else from gym class mostly was doing them. So when I went to talk to the instructor, she was so alarmed that he hadn't done lessons before. And she said, and just like, she was very kind about it, but she said, well, we don't even know where we would place him. He's almost 12. And she was kind of, and she was talking about the different levels, and she said, well, and I said, no, he knows how to swim. I don't think you're going to have to put him in any of the lower levels. Why don't you just have him do a swim test for like a safety perspective and just see what you think? So they did a series of things with him, and I can still see her. She came like barreling around the pool, and she said, oh my goodness, he's in, I can't remember what the levels are now, but it was not the highest level, but it was certainly with everybody his age, right? He was with all his friends. And she said, but he just learned to swim, like a few months ago, and he hasn't been in lessons. And I'm like, well, yeah, but he's 12 now. And he's like, it doesn't really take that much to learn to swim, really, if you get comfortable in the water. And he definitely had, some of their specific techniques and stuff he didn't have, right? So he had to learn those, but those really aren't such a big deal when you're motivated and you're comfortable. So that was kind of the first time that I got thinking about this, just seeing her surprise and almost panic of like, what are we going to do with this kid? He's way too big to be in with the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds. And just how surprised she was that he had learned and that we had been able to support him in learning. So I think it's like two things. It's like, it's the self-directed piece of it, but it's also a family's ability, or maybe friends' ability, to help with that process and just do that a little bit more organically. So
It's also interesting to me, Erin, the thing, because we have a very similar situation in our family, but it's also interesting the kind of shock that he would be able to do that on his own, albeit with your support, but without the idea of having structured lessons. And it's weird. I wonder how I didn't learn to swim personally until I was 17 or 18, and I had lots and lots of swimming lessons as a child, and I could never get it. And it was very frustrating for everybody that tried to get involved to help me to learn to swim. And I was on holiday when I was 17 or 18 abroad in nice warm water, and it just clicked for me, and I started swimming around the people that I was on holiday with. And I wonder how much people might say, oh, well, it's all those swimming lessons that you had before. All those things contributed to you learning to swim. And maybe they did, I don't know. But thinking about your son, Erin, and thinking about my son, because my 2 eldest daughters had swimming lessons, but my third child, my son, we were home educating by the time that he would have been going into swimming lessons, and so he didn't want swimming lessons, and he didn't have swimming lessons. And we used to go really regularly as a family, and his dad's a great swimmer and his sisters are really good swimmers. I'm still not so great, but that's more to do with my fear of the water than I could be great, I guess, if I bothered, but it's not something I want to put the time and energy into. So I can swim, but not elegantly or whatever. So anyway, all the other three, the other three in the family could swim brilliantly, and we used to go. And he's never had a swimming lesson in his life, and he, just the same as me, at some point just swam round us, really. And I can't even remember how old he was, but so for him, there definitely wasn't well, I guess you could still say that because the other two had swimming lessons and their dad used to take them to swimming lessons, he was very attentive to what the swimming teachers were doing, and would often, when he took them just swimming socially, he would sort of say things that he thought were helpful from what the swimming, so it's difficult to know where your learning comes from, isn't it? But I just think that he learned much. He was definitely probably 10 or 11. He was much younger than me when he learned to swim by himself, essentially. But the same as your son, with us, we used to go regularly, and that's how. So it just made me think really about yeah, I suppose the idea of people being. I think people are often like to think, yeah, that if you had one piano lesson, then maybe that contributes to your genius. I don't know. It's an interesting. We're so reliant, I guess, aren't we, on having experts to help us? And nothing wrong with an expert. I think that's great. We do all need to, it's great to get knowledge and advice and whatever from somebody who knows more about something than you. But I guess we're just lacking a bit. We're lacking a lot of trust, I guess, in our own abilities and often in our children's abilities to do things without having that kind of formal instruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Erin.
No, that's okay, Ashley. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it makes me think about how long our school system's been around for, and what these type of non-academic things would look like before school was such a big thing in our society, and how that's changed us over time. And I think it has over time, because it's making me think about some readings I did of Dr. Peter Gray. I know he's looked at kind of like more free play stuff versus more of the much more structured activities, especially around sports and stuff. But I think swimming as well, right? Like how children learn to swim 100, 200 years ago versus now, it looks drastically different. But through this process, I think, yeah, what Haley said, we've lost that feeling of trusting. We just now expect, well, if you're going to learn how to do something, swimming, and we'll talk about different things today too, you need a teacher and you need structure and you need weekly lessons or regular lessons. And it's going to take, you should be in swim lessons for years too, right? And we just kind of, a lot of us grew up with that. And now we have those ideas of that's how we learn, or maybe the idea that that's the best way the majority of people learn. And I think a lot of people listening will relate to the swimming example. I know I have a similar experience that you guys have shared with my two. And I think part of it with swimming, and this would be true with other examples as well, I guess, but with swimming, it's not like there's that safety piece to it, right? I've heard other parents say, I don't love how upset my kiddo gets at swimming lessons, but it's a safety thing, right? Like we have to do this. They have to learn how to swim. It's so dangerous if they don't have this life skill. So there's that another layer, I guess, of fear in there. We have that worry as parents, or that fear that they're not just going to naturally learn. How will they learn if they don't do these swim lessons? But also this fear of what could happen if they don't learn how to swim, or if they're not a good swimmer. And none of us do well, as we've talked about here. We're certainly not learning, and we're not being super patient when we're coming from that place of fear, which I think is common when it's around things like swimming. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but as you guys were talking about swim lessons, I remember taking my eldest to the pool for swim lessons, where I would go in the pool and he would have been not even one. like very much a baby still. And it was just a nice thing to do together, to go out and do together. But I remember the first time where the instructor, and I don't remember if this was the first lesson or if this happened a few lessons in, but everyone was standing in a circle and we were all holding our baby. And the swim instructor told us to now like dunk the baby into the water and then lift them up. And I guess I froze because I did not do it. I just stood there holding mine and then watching what everyone else did. And I think, if I remember correctly, everyone else did. And I watched the babies' reactions, and some babies, I think a lot of them just kind of came up with a surprised look, but at least a couple were very upset and there was distress involved. And the swim instructor had you do it, I think, a couple times before we moved on to something else. And I had to really think about how I felt about that. And I never did it. Because I think I thought we're starting exposure to water and to swimming, and maybe I would do it and he would come out and just be a bit surprised and I think the idea is like get them really comfortable with having their face underwater. But I could see from other babies' reactions, and I kind of had a feeling, knowing my baby, that he wouldn't love that. And I thought, that doesn't feel right to me. And it could, I don't want to say, necessarily create a fear of the water, but I guess it could. And it just didn't make sense to me to do it that way. I didn't think it was necessary. And we did those swim lessons. I think we did a couple like different 8-week sessions or whatever together. And I just skipped that part. And the swim instructor never said anything. And I don't remember when he did it, but he put his face in the water on his own eventually and just kind of discovered that all on his own. And that's probably one of the first times where I thought, like, there was an example for me that I could observe. He did this when he was ready and when it was his choice, and it still happened. And I think it would have been fine. I mean, it was nice that it was probably nice for me that it didn't take a real long time, because I could see that happened kind of when he was ready. But yeah, we did swim lessons later on. I don't remember why we paused, and I'm trying to think how old he would have been when we went back to swim lessons, but it would have been the age where he was to go in the pool without me. And that was a very different experience. And I think we went to just the first session and he tried, but the swim instructor tried to take his group to the deep end along the edge of the pool so they could hold on, but to the deep end as soon as they got in the pool. And the other group of maybe 4 or 5 kids went. And my guy was like, I could tell he wanted to and he was trying to, but it was a struggle and it wasn't happening. And then that's distressing too, right? Because now my instructor's gone, I'm getting called on, but this isn't feeling right, probably not feeling safe to me. And there were other younger ones in the pool crying and screaming, and it was just a whole thing. And I think that was, my kiddo was experiencing that as well. And it turned into a pretty negative experience pretty quickly. And I was sitting on the edge of the pool being like, this can't be the best way. This can't be there's got to be a different way. So anyway, we stopped with those. I don't even think we went to the second one. I was like, no, forget it. This is not going to work for us. And we did what you guys did. We swam together. And both my kids, we did some private swim lessons too, a little bit here and there. So I'm sure that helped. But for the most part, it's just been swimming together and having those, I guess, safer feeling experiences in the water and having it through play and fun. And they're not fantastic swimmers where we live. We do have the indoor pools we can go to, but we can go months at a time where we're not swimming. So that looks different too, as far as how much practice we get in. But they love the water and they love swimming, and they've never been in a situation around water without us where I've worried about them being in any kind of danger or feeling like, oh my gosh, you should be a stronger swimmer. So that's worked for us. And I think the swimming example will probably, I think a lot of people listening will relate to that one.
Well, just the fact that, oh, sorry, Haley, go ahead. No, okay. Just the fact that we all have some, at least we have one or two kids or some degree of like experience with swim lessons, kind of shows you how universal that is. Because I bet you if we talked about another sport or instrument or type of art or anything like that, I bet we would have slightly different like groups or lessons that our kids have tried. So I think you're right, Ashley. I think the swimming one is a really common example because it's, for that safety reason. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, the safety piece. I think too, it's like you can work with ideals, and ideally, it would be great if everybody was a swimmer and a strong swimmer, and maybe, had even gone to that higher level where they understood life-saving techniques and all those kinds of things. That would be fantastic. And I can understand why people would want their kids to be strong swimmers, at a fairly young age, because again, from a safety perspective, that's great. But sometimes we're not working with ideals. And I think sometimes things just are what they are. And it's kind of we've kind of talked about this off podcast or off recording before, this idea of like kind of that final what if, like what's the big fear at the end of our drive for things. And because my husband doesn't swim and his family doesn't swim, I know that you can live a safe and healthy life without swimming. You really actually can survive quite well without swimming. It's not a prerequisite for living life. And so I think that we have these messages in our head that, to be a good parent, you get them into swimming lessons and you do whatever. And sure, you can try those things. Like there's nothing wrong with lessons. There's nothing wrong with direct instruction. But I think sometimes just looking at what is that what if at the end? And if our kids, for whatever reason, for health reasons, for interest reasons, for, if they don't end up being swimmers, then that kind of is what it is. I feel like sometimes we have these fears and we're not even really sure what they're of. It's just kind of societal that you go along with things. And just I'll say one more thing. My guy that I told the story about with swimming, we did also try swimming lessons years prior. He would have been about 4. And again, he wanted to do them. It was part of this, we'd kind of joined this homeschool group. It was our first year, I think. And he had a couple little buddies and they were pretty excited and he was pretty excited. And he did want to get in that kind of more shallow part of the water, as long as he wasn't splashed too much or, there was a lot of stuff around that. But there was a slide, and it was a small slide. It was like a little blue slide that went into the shallow end. And so the kids would take a turn going down it and he wouldn't go down. And so the swim instructor took him by the hand and pulled him down. And that was also our last lesson. Actually, it's like, nope. And it's so fascinating because after those lessons, that just didn't tend to be the pool that we went to again. So all of his later swim experience none of it would have been at that pool. And one day, he would have been probably 19 or 20 by this point. I happened to be at that pool. He was away at college, but I was at that pool because I was dropping my daughter off to swim with some friends there. And I looked over and I thought, oh my gosh, the little blue slide it's still there. It's still in the same spot, right? And this is like 15 or 16 years later. So I took a picture of it. He and I have fun with tech stuff, right? So I took a picture of it and I didn't say anything. I just sent it to him. And he was like, oh my gosh, the slide. And he totally, he hadn't been there in 15 years, but that memory of that slide and being pulled down the slide, he's not traumatized by it, but he had some choice words to say about about the slide, but it's definitely something he remembered. It did not lead to him becoming a swimmer. That particular, being dragged into the water didn't lead to his interest in swimming. Anyway, okay, sorry, Healy, go ahead.
No, well, I know we don't want to talk about swimming for the whole
right.
episode, but it just really reminded me what you were saying, Ashley, about I wonder how this links to when school became more common. And I've been watching Little House on the Prairie recently, the TV, the TV show. And there's an episode that I've just seen recently, where there's a little boy that goes to live with the Ingalls for a while, and they discover that he can't swim. And so Pa chucks him in, basically. And then, as you can imagine, he starts to swim really quickly, and straight away he's having fun with Laura and Mary. And that was just funny, because it made me think, because of course Little House on the Prairie is set at the time where schools are becoming more common, isn't it? Because they have quite a few periods where they don't go to school for one reason or another, don't they? And I know Ma's a teacher, so I suppose some people might say, well, they're all right because Ma can teach them. And then Mary becomes a teacher and whatever, spoilers. But it's just funny thinking of how at that point, and I know lots of people, it's a very common thing to do, to dunk kids, isn't it, or to throw them in. It is, and that definitely happened to me as a child. I had an uncle who was, I'm sure, trying to be he was frustrated. He loved swimming, very frustrated by the fact that all these lessons were, because we tried all sorts of things, private lessons and one-to-one and group lessons and all that kind of stuff. And I think he was just frustrated and thought, oh, we'll just try this and see if it works. And it didn't work. That, I don't know how young I was then, but of course it didn't work for years later, until I was for me, I guess I was at the right time for me. But it was just funny how those two things happened in the same show. The fact that Pa's just chucking him in, and then on the other hand, you've got this kind of, because they're very education focused in the television program of Little House on the Prairie. It's all, if they see any children that aren't going to school, you must go to school. This is the route. And I know, there's really good reasons for that, and they want to lift people out of poverty and whatever. But it's also interesting. I know that there have been discussions around literacy levels in America before formal schooling came to be more common, and some, it's not as if people weren't, there wasn't just complete illiteracy in America before schools came. That's not the case, is it? So it's just, it just reminded me of that, how the two things really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me really think about how it's this reminder that we all experience things differently. And I think it's easy as a younger parent or like a newer parent, you see what everyone else is doing, and it's become like not just swim lessons, but I'm thinking a lot about other sports, like structured sports, skating around where we live. Not everyone, obviously, but it feels like everyone puts their kids in skating like at 3-4 years old. And we did that. My husband grew up playing hockey. And you kind of see that that's what everyone's doing. And you think, okay, this is the time where they can learn how to skate. But I found it very frustrating that it felt, again, not everyone, but so many people were starting, whether it was swim lessons or skating lessons / playing hockey, signing up for soccer. I have a lot of probably true for non-sports too. Like I'm thinking music lessons maybe as well, although I don't see as many people doing that around where we live. I think it's true, Erin, depending on where you live, right? It looks different, which, I mean, that highlights something right there about how important these things actually are. But I found it really frustrating with the skating, for example, that it kind of felt like there was pressure to push our eldest to learn how to skate and to get into hockey, because essentially, if he didn't, he'd miss out, because all the other kids, pretty much all the other kids, with hockey being so popular and common around here, were going to have years on him. And how are you going to be a good hockey player if you're not a strong skater? And if the kids before, and I'm not saying that I think there is some truth to that when it comes to skating, for example. However, I can think of my one friend who her son would be about around 10 years old right now. And he just started playing hockey and wasn't skating lots before. I think just casually skating here and there over the years. And he started hockey when he was 9, like about a year ago, maybe when he was 8, and just jumped right in, naturally athletic, and picked it up. And he's doing so well. And I wonder how many, like, again, it just goes back to what I was saying, like, there's that reminder that we all develop not only physically, but like our interests and where we are cognitively, all at different spots. So, I'm sure, because I saw it with swim lessons, I saw it with skating. There were kids there that were upset and did not want to be there. It was not just our kid, who, were pushed to continue going, because their parents felt like it was important and they didn't want their kids to miss out. But if a group of us had just all been like, it's okay, we'll try again next year, or maybe the year after that, and also recognizing, maybe, I mean, my eldest still doesn't play hockey. He doesn't have the interest. He was never, I mean, he's going to be 11, and it's not like he's come to us and said, why didn't you keep me in skating? I wish I could go play hockey. And that could have happened, but it didn't. But yeah, I think it's a shame that for the kids that, maybe needed another year or two, maybe would have been more interested or would have been more ready, down the road, it does seem harder to get in, because a lot of them are pushed to just keep going, and then they just get past it. Or maybe, I'm sure some of them don't get past it, and then they eventually just stop as well, which is another piece maybe to this conversation about quitting things. Yeah, anyway, I'm rambling now, but it was just really what I wanted to highlight, was that there's that reminder that naturally we all are ready for different things at different times. And Haley, thinking back to you with your swimming, what does that do to our kids? I mean, I don't know exactly how you felt about it, so I don't want to say that this is how you felt, but when we do push our kids to do something that they're not ready for, I think often it can lead to them feeling bad about themselves and like, well, why can't I do it? Obviously, everyone around me thinks that I should be able to do it. Whereas, maybe Aaron, with your son with swimming, didn't have to feel that way because he wasn't pushed when he wasn't ready. And then when he was able to really get into swimming, could feel good about it and learn pretty quickly too. And it didn't have to be a struggle for years. So
I think there's a lot of this comes back to, I mean, you were saying about the what ifs, Erin, and the fear. I think there is often ideas about kind of magic moments, and that if we don't learn something at the magic moment that we ought to, if that moment passes, then maybe we're never going to be able to learn it, or perhaps it's going to be so much harder for us to learn things. And I know in terms of musical instruments, I suppose, and sports, I guess, if you like you see the gymnasts who started when they were 2 or something, and then if you have a child who wants to be a professional gymnast and they don't start till they're 12 or something, I guess there's going to be so many messages telling them that it's just not possible. And yet I'm sure that there are people in the Olympics who started later. I can't think of anybody, but I'm sure that happens in professional kind of professional kind of environments as well. But I guess there's a lot of people who will actually be put off and will never try because they just think, oh no, it's just going to be too hard for me. And and that's really sad, isn't it, for us as adults, perhaps, if we've harbored this dream of being a professional gymnast, but because we didn't start when we were 2, we've kind of decided that we'll never do it, and so we never try. And that's I don't know, that's that. And I think there's like you were saying about feeling bad about yourself, there's a lot of I guess pressure on parents to feel they don't want to fail their children, so they think, oh, we better try all these things, all these different things when they're little, because if we don't try them now, and if we don't force them now when they're little, then we could be sort of denying them their dream or their gold medal or what it's not a conscious thing, is it, that you think you sign your kid up for gymnastics and they're going to get a gold medal? But I guess it is a subconscious fear, isn't it, that none of us want to fail our children, and we want to give them all the opportunities that we can. And if society is kind of telling us that we need to do that all, you can't learn things when you're older, it's just too there's a lot of that, isn't there? You can't teach an old dog new tricks or whatever it is. There's a lot of and maybe it is harder, but I think in terms of what neuroscience is finding, you know, our brain, there is a lot of plasticity or whatever they call it in our brains, isn't there, for us to learn to get new pathways. You know, that doesn't stop when we're 5. That, I think, you know, children are developing, their brains are developing hugely well into their 20s or whatever, and as adults we're still developing. We never stop, do we? We keep learning things. So it's a real shame, isn't it, to think that it might potentially put so many people off trying things.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, that the really important thing that I think comes out scientifically, but that we can see it with our own eyes. Those first few years, the most important thing in those few years are attachment, trust, sense of self, understanding of where they are in the world. It's not a specific skill. You know, like as you're saying, Haley, those opportunities don't end because a child's turned 6 or 7 or whatever. What's so much more important is that sense of acceptance and love and trust and connection. And so pushing those skills, it doesn't always get in the way. It depends on a child's personality. I mean, some kids really, maybe they are really passionate about something from a young age, but yeah, it's that almost like the scarcity mindset of there's not going to be enough time. There's not going to be enough time. We've got to get things moving. And there's, you know, I think as parents too, there's no way for us to possibly know all the different things that we could introduce our kids to that they might be, you know, it's just not possible. So I think we have to give ourselves some grace sometimes too, that, we're not terrible parents if we didn't introduce 5 different sets of lessons by the time there's been a couple of interesting conversations come up with my youngest son, who's very kind of naturally good at basketball. He's just really good at basketball. He's very interested in it. He has really good skills. He's played a lot of basketball, but interestingly, anytime that we tried kind of a more intense sort of basketball team, he very politely he'd give himself kind of a trial period and politely go back to more of like a casual setup. And he's been like that with everything. He actually never even tried swim lessons. He's just not a lesson kind of a person, which was good to know about him. He was very clear about that from the time he was a kid, but every now and again, he will be watching an NBA game and he'll see players that have been signed on that are like his age, right? They're like 21 or they're 22. And there's just this little part of him. He'll say, you guys should have pushed me. And not that I don't think he necessarily thinks he was NBA level, but I think there's a part of him that's like, you know, he'll just say it. Oh, you know, you guys, you should have lived through me. You should have pushed me. And so he's saying it as a joke because he knows that's what we would have had to do for him, you know, but he's just like playing with that idea, I think, a little bit. So for me, you know, it does. There's this little twinge at times. Again, we have no reason to think he'd be in the NBA, but he definitely has a lot of natural skills. So you just don't know even, you know, at what level he could have been playing at, you know, in an organized way. But there's a little bit of a twinge because there's a piece of him that kind of does feel a little bit regretful, but then, you know, we kind of joke about it and he knows he never would have wanted that life, but he wouldn't have wanted to have done what it would have taken to get to that level either. So yeah, I think it's we have to sit with that tension a little bit sometimes that, if we don't push our kids, it is true that they might be less achievement oriented in a particular area, because some personalities will push up against that, but other personalities do roll with that and they keep doing the thing because they feel they're supposed to. and it brings them a lot of external reward. So I don't know. And I mean, there's a lot of reward. There's a lot of external praise given to parents when they're kids. You'll hear athletes or musicians, "Oh, thank you to my mom and dad for hanging in there with me and getting me to all those early morning practices." So there's praise for kids, but there's also praise for parents. So it's a different mindset, I think, that we're talking about here. That's maybe just not so attached to the outcome.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of messaging out there too, that if you're good at something or if you have a natural talent at something, that you are supposed to use that. You're not supposed to let it go to waste. I hear that a lot around sports, definitely, but I think, yeah, musical talent. If you're good at something, then you can't just enjoy it. You can't just have it as something you do as a hobby or with friends or casually, which I think can really ruin it for a lot of people if they listen to that messaging or that pressure to push themselves, because there's so much more. Like thinking about your son with basketball, like he likes the game, he enjoys the game, he can have fun at the game, and often we do like things that we're naturally good at. That just makes sense and tends to go hand in hand. But when you add more like formality to it, more structure to it, there becomes more expectations, like it can really start to take that joy away. So yeah, I understand you can be left with kind of the wondering, well, what if? But I think, and I know I've heard like really accomplished athletes, I don't necessarily want to give an example of a specific person because I'll probably mess it up and get it wrong. I'll say, I think it was Wayne Gretzky, who I remember hearing, I don't know if it was an interview with him or maybe his dad, about how he would be up first thing in the morning before everyone else out on the pond playing hockey. And I've heard multiple examples of this, of the parents were supportive, but there was no pushing necessary. Like Wayne Gretzky, would maybe be one of those examples who not only had the natural talent, but also the joy in getting up early in the morning and practicing every single day. And not everybody gets joy from that, and that's okay too. I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. But that's a really good example of self-directed. And yes, he ended up, I mean, we don't know the ins and outs of it, but it appears that he enjoyed being part of a team and having lessons and that sort of thing. And so that can be part of self-directed learning, as we know, right? It's not that you might choose to do that, but that drive and that readiness was coming from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other thing that came to mind for me, Haley, I think you were talking about, I think it was in the context of Little House on the Prairie and the idea of, sometimes there were good reasons for things and kind of lifting people and probably wanting to provide opportunity. So it's kind of coming from a good place, some of that messaging. And I'm always kind of fascinated to see the difference in my parents, for example. So my mom had the opportunity to have, well, her mom was actually like an organist and a music teacher. And I mean, these weren't fancy lessons. It was like a small town church, but she grew up with, a lot of vocal experience and piano lessons and theory. So she had a very kind of lesson structured oriented introduction to music, whereas my dad didn't have any of that. But he, as I can't remember how old he would have been, maybe in his teens, he joined like a citizen band, and learned to play, I believe the French horn was what he learned to play as part of being part of this kind of public band. Like the type that you see marching in parades, that kind of thing. Like he just joined this band. And then over the years, he has taught himself to play multiple instruments. So, I remember there was an old man who lived up the road from us, very elderly guy, and he had gotten to the point where he had a very heavy accordion. So he wanted to pass it on to my dad. And so I can remember my dad just teaching himself. I mean, this was before YouTube, right? Just working with this until he could, I mean, he was not a fantastic accordion player probably, but he could certainly play a lot of songs on the accordion, and just continued, right? The guitar, I mean, once you can play one string instrument, the banjo, he has like several banjos now. I was over there the other day. I think he's got 14 harmonicas. He's got like a whole thing. And I just watched him do this. Like, he bought this secondhand drum set for several years, and he just would teach himself all these kind of instruments. And you would never, he actually has a much wider repertoire than my mom does. My mom would have more theory knowledge probably, but I don't know actually at this point, to be honest with you, because he can go back and forth between instruments and he can make all kinds of variations with different keys. So I don't even know if that's actually true. But, and they both enjoy music. So I don't believe that she was necessarily pushed into it. It's definitely something that she has appreciated, but it hasn't stopped my dad from learning to do those same things. But music lessons is another thing that I think there is this feeling like you have to push kids to learn a musical instrument and they will appreciate it. It's like, you may not like practicing now, but you'll appreciate it when you're older. And I think there's a lot of stories that around that, a lot of narrative around that. And sometimes that might be true, but I think a lot of the time it's not. A lot of the time it just turns kids off. But I think the other messaging that I guess I've just noticed is it's not impossible to learn an instrument as an adult or as a teenager or really at any age. But I think that's a big one too. This sense of like offering your child music lessons has a certain, I don't know what the word is, but it has a certain feel to it that there can be, I think, a little bit of pressure there. But again, what would be the worst thing that would happen? So your child, so they don't play an instrument? Like, life goes on. And I know, I think things get tied up in all sorts of studies too, right? And a lot of it gets hooked into academics, you know, math performance linked to music and cultural appreciation linked to music and all these different things. But I don't know, I feel like that can be a lot of sort of fear mongering and sometimes a lot of marketing also from music businesses. Often if you look at the source, it's not entirely unbiased.
Yeah, I think you're right, Erin, and I think it's important for us to say, I guess, isn't it, that because one of the myths about unschooling and self-directed learning, natural learning, whatever, is that people never take classes, and that's not what we're advocating or that we're saying. I guess what we've found, or what we're discussing here, I guess, is that it is such an individual thing, isn't it? And some people really appreciate the security, perhaps the step-by-step nature of lessons. They that's where they thrive. And then for other people, they don't find that environment so helpful to their learning, and perhaps they would rather do it in a more self-directed way. And obviously the opportunities that we have now, you mentioned YouTube, Erin, I can't think how many times you hear people say, how did you find out how to do that? Or I went on YouTube. And it's we do have, with the tech, we have so many opportunities to learn things ourselves, but but there's still a place, isn't there, for people to be able to learn in a more formal, structured environment. And the issue, I guess, is about people having the opportunities but not necessarily feeling that they have to be driven to one way or another, or that one way or another is superior, or recognizing that our learning is such a personal thing. And for it can be one person who decides to take lessons in one thing, but then decides that they can they can learn something else in a different way. And I'm sure we're all we can all think of examples in our own lives where we felt that we've had the desire and the drive and the interest to learn something without support, perhaps, or with minimal support or direction or whatever. And then there are other things that we really love the idea of taking a formal class in something. And like you said, I think it was you, Erin, that said at the beginning, that can be for a lot of reasons. It might be because you want to meet people who are experts in that field. It can be because you want to do it in a kind of community way. There are benefits to both sides, aren't there? There are, it might be that that you want to get a certificate in something. It might be, there are all kinds of reasons why you might change, why you might choose those. And I guess it's about keeping your options open and recognizing that there are lots of different pathways.
One thing this is making me think about what you're just saying, Haley, about there being lots of different pathways. Something that's come up for us that I've maybe shared on here, I'm not too sure. But one thing I noticed is that where we live anyway, it doesn't feel like there's like we have to really look for the different ways and the different pathways of learning different things. They're not as obvious. Like the obvious ones are like registering for something or signing up for something. And all of the activities, even though it can be different sports or activities or different clubs even can be of different things, they all look similar where it's adult centered and it's the adults in charge or the grown-ups in charge. Sometimes it's like maybe older teenagers with a very, and again, this is just where we live from what I've seen. So I'm sure there's different experiences other places, but very structured and formal and through like lessons. And I guess what I'm saying is I'm not seeing as much play. I think that's my viewpoint now with all the deschooling I've done and what true play really looks like. My understanding of play now is different than what I think it would have been like when I was going through teachers college. But when I think that's what my kids are coming back to me saying when they do see something and they go, that doesn't look like much fun. Like, yes, I'm interested in being with the other kids, or yes, I'm interested in learning how to play soccer, but that does not look fun. That looks boring. And when I watch, it is a lot of standing around, listening, following instructions, practicing this one specific thing. And again, it might be different in different places. So I realize that's not true for everyone, but that's what we've been experiencing as a family. So mine are 10 and 7 right now, almost 8. And there's not been a lot of interest. But one thing my youngest one and I experienced was it was a yoga class, but it was, I don't know if they called it a family yoga class, but essentially him and I got to do it together. And the other kids that were there had either like a parent with them or I know that there was at least a couple grandparents there. And it was just designed that way it wasn't just a drop-off program. It was, I think you did have that option. So there was that flexibility where you could drop your kid off if you couldn't stay, or maybe if you had other kids that you had to take care of while the class was on. But it was a very welcoming space. I think only one kid was dropped off, so it was nothing for me to stay. And my youngest got to experience a yoga class with me there, which felt, was he 6? No, he was 7. It wasn't that long ago. Where, if it had been where I had to drop him off, he probably would have been like, no, because he wouldn't have known what to expect, which would have made him feel really uncomfortable. But the fact that we could go do it together, and if I said, let's try it. If you don't like it, we don't need to go again, but let's go try it. And he already knew a couple of the other kids that were going to be in the class too. But again, if I hadn't stayed, he probably would have, just politely declined, which would have been fine too. But he really enjoyed it. He had, he didn't like the craft piece to it too much, but he really, he enjoyed it. And it made me realize that is not something we see around where we live. It's right from the get-go, other than the swim lessons that I talked about earlier on, where it was, you go in the pool with your baby, because how else would you be able to do it in a pool? You need to hold the babies. And I think like 1-year-old, 2-year-olds in the pool, right? And then it goes to being more of a drop-off situation. But everything else, like my eldest did, gymnastics and soccer and tennis and baseball and hockey. And it was all, unless you volunteered as like a coach or a helper, it was all a drop-off program where you would, maybe watch from off to the side on the sidelines. and that works for some kids. It really doesn't work for my youngest. And so now I'll look for those different types of programs where it's just a more comfortable environment that feels safer, where we can maybe do it together. I think martial arts programs, I've seen some of those. That's not uncommon to see with those. But for the most part, these days, it seems like it's a drop-off situation, which I think, well, that's a shame, because why not, it can just feel so much easier to access, I think, for younger ones, but even older kids too, who just are not sure, because you're trying something new. And in a lot of these situations, like a lot of the programs I'm thinking of, you have an audience when you're doing it. And so when you're learning something new, and it's not something you're good at because you're just starting, it can feel super uncomfortable to, it's not just the kids that you're doing with and the one adult maybe, or one or two adults watching you. There's all the people, around the soccer field or baseball or whatever it is, that are watching. And I think for a lot of people, that's enough for them to just say, no, thanks. Whereas if it can be more of a, let's do this together with people like your family, or with, I think that's probably the way it used to be more so before. And we've just really gotten away from that. It's a lot of, I'm just, thinking about that separation piece, right? Like as young as 3 years old, you need to go off on your own and go do this experience on your own. And there's a lot of that messaging around, well, that's how they build resilience. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking the very same thing that you just said, Ashley, about like, has it become more this way? And I think it has, because if I'm looking back to, like, I really like to swim. I'm a pretty strong swimmer, and I think I went to a few weeks of lessons, and I remember exactly what you're talking about with an audience, because there was a bus that picked us all up and we all went to this pool. No parents were there at all. I think I was 6 or 7. And I do remember everyone just hanging over, watching you do your swim test to decide what level you were going to be in. And it was a lot. And I can't remember whether I finished those lessons or not. I don't think I did. I think I might have dropped out of those. I think I might have opted out of continuing those lessons. And it didn't stop me from learning to swim. And I would say the same thing about skating. Like, yes, skating was a very big thing in the area that I am from. I think a lot of Canada's like that, right? And yeah, people there were skating lessons, there were swimming lessons, but it wasn't there were all kinds of people who didn't take them as well and still skated and still went swimming. And another thing that's been really has changed. Everything wasn't elite. Everything has become elite, right? So like you could join like a local choir, but for my daughter, I'm just thinking, I was just part of a very simple choir. I was part of a choir for many years as a kid. And she wanted to be part of a choir, and it was lovely and it was wonderful and it was a great experience, but it was a lot. It was a lot of money. There was a lot of auditioning. There were a lot of performances and buses places, and having to have exactly the right, gown or dress or whatever. And it's something that she really wanted to do. And she would be an example of somebody who does like to seek something out when she wants to learn something, although she does a lot on her own as well. But she does like to have, even when she's working on her art, she will look for a step-by-step. Like she'll get a course for herself on things. So some people, but I still see that as self-directed, because she's figured out how she likes to learn, and she kind of finds that source and goes through that. But no, where I was going with that is, to me, growing up, like, yeah, there were a few choirs around at a few different churches or community centers, but it's not like that anymore. It's audition, and you pay money, and everything's just become, if I even look at the way hockey was growing up, it's just not enough anymore. People are driving their kids far, and dance lessons aren't dance lessons anymore. It's all competitive. So there's, I think it's moved beyond lessons to this really high level of competition for things. And it does feel sometimes like it can, I think it's hard if you do actually have a child who really wants to move there. You kind of have to work with your brain around that, because there's a whole vibe that's that it can be quite intense. So I do notice that, Ashley. I think yeah, everything's just kind of amped up as far as expectations, and yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we're really lucky, because we've had a situation with my youngest daughter where she had swimming lessons, but it was actually a home ed swimming group. So we hired the pool. I think I may have talked about this before. We hired the pool as a group, and 2 swimming instructors were available. They had a group in the little pool at the shallow end, and a group in the deep end. And I think when it first started, it was the swimming instructors expected it to be much more what they were used to with the school groups. But as over time, it's been going for years now. I mean, my daughter stopped going now. She decided once she could swim, she didn't really want to go anymore. But I think the vibe has changed, in that they had so many parents saying, if they don't want to jump in, they don't have to. And and they could tell, parents would be sort of coming, because we would sit round the pool as well, which they could tell that, I guess, there was just a different, I mean, because they were used to teaching school groups, so the parents couldn't sit round because these were actually, when I say school groups, they were actually children coming as a class from school. That's what they would do for the morning. And then we would be last. So they'd have done, say, 3 lots of school lessons, and then they had us. So they kind of were in this train of thinking, I think, that they realized that lots of kids didn't respond very well to, because, I mean, to be fair to swimming instructors, it's a funny place too. It's a lot of echo and whatever, isn't it? So swimming instructors tend to be loud, but obviously they need the children to hear. And it is, it is a high risk environment, isn't it? I guess, but gradually over time, you just saw that they weren't, at the beginning, it was like they felt it was their job to get everybody to jump in. It was their job to get everybody to go underwater. And I can understand that, because they're obviously following these little duckling or whatever penguin awards or whatever it is that they have in terms of swimming. And so they, if parents are paying good money, they don't want to let parents down by not moving their children up the grades, I guess. But they could see that this class wasn't going to be quite the same as that, I think. And it just became a much more, it's fine, we're not bothered if they don't move up to the next kind of grade level. That's fine. We're much more interested in them kind of just enjoying it, and this is like a social thing. And there have been other things like that as well. I think I've got friends who've been involved in an art group which started out being a little bit more prescriptive. Everybody's going to do this activity and produce this same thing to take home with you, and then that gradually sort of, almost like the edges got softened a bit, and they kind of recognized that some of these kids weren't really engaging with that as well, and they kind of, it morphed into being much more of experimentation, and so they were still giving delivery and like the swimming instructors, still giving them helpful tips, and still doing a lot of passing on the information and the skills that they have and the knowledge that they have, but they were just doing it in a kind of, in a different way, really. And the other thing I was going to say, so I think, I agree with you. We need more of that, don't we? We need more, and I think we've talked about that in other episodes as well, haven't we? But the other thing I was going to say, from what you guys have been saying, was how important safety and security is to learning. How, if our nervous system doesn't feel safe, if we sense that there's some kind of danger, somebody shouts at us and we feel, I don't know, that rattles us a bit, then we don't have as much brain space to actually take in the information that somebody's trying to give to us. And I think it's, we've I don't know, it's easy to forget that, isn't it? It's easy to forget how important that kind of safety is to effective learning. And like the lovely example you gave, Ashley, of the yoga class, where that must have been a really nice experience for your child to go to a new place that I'm presuming they hadn't been to before, and all those kinds of things, but they're with you, so they get that that comfort and security from being with you, which means they probably had much more energy, emotional energy, and kind of intellectual energy to actually get more out of it almost. I think that's just, I don't know, it's really powerful when you think about it in terms of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I wonder if some of us don't know that because of how we were raised and what our own experiences were. And that hasn't crossed our paths yet. This idea that actually we learn a lot better if we feel safe. And I was actually just thinking about my experience with my own driving lessons that my parents um, forced me to take, which I was not happy about because they picked the driving school. I think it was called Young Drivers, so anyone, right? Young Drivers, yeah, for those people in Canada or in Ontario, I guess maybe. It was at the time anyway, it was hundreds of dollars. It was expensive, but I know it made my parents feel safer knowing that that was what I was going to take. So I was forced to take these, and my driving instructor made me feel so extremely uncomfortable. Um, and I want to point out that when I first started driving, I would drive with one of my parents. And I don't think I was great to begin with, but I was pretty comfortable and okay with it. I was pretty, like just aware, and I was concerned about safety, and but not super stressed, and like I was off to a good start and it felt really good. And then when I started these driving lessons, which I already wasn't looking forward to, but I thought, well, okay, how bad can it be? And I'm sure it'll be good to learn these different things. And then yeah, I got this driving instructor who um just made me feel so uncomfortable. I remember I went to school with another person who also had the same driving instructor, and I remember we would talk about it, and you just felt like if you made the smallest mistake, you were going to get yelled at or made to feel so bad, like you weren't practicing enough. And that I was the type of kid that stuff made me feel so uncomfortable. Like I just needed encouragement. I was happy for constructive feedback, but I did not respond well. Like I would just shut right down. And I mean, I can't imagine my brain capacity and what I was able to take on. And if my parents hadn't been forcing me, and they didn't force me to do much, but this was one, I was not optional. And if my parents hadn't pushed me, I for sure would have quit those driving lessons. And I guess switching driving instructors, I maybe wasn't an option, or I didn't know. But it is my own example. So I can think back to that, where I started off having a pretty good experience learning to drive. And then not long after, when I had to take these driving lessons, and I just happened to have this instructor that I felt really unsafe with. And it was quite a few lessons. I don't think my driving improved. I mean, maybe there were certain things I learned that kept me safer, hopefully, but I remember feeling sick to my stomach before the lessons. I mean, before the lessons, not even just before the tests, and to the point where I would go home and nap. My stress levels, I think, were so high that I would go home and often fall asleep after them. And I don't think I had that with any other experience other than those driving lessons. But having that as my own example, Haley, it reminds me of what I was able to do in those lessons when I felt so dysregulated. Not that I would have known that word at the time, but just I knew I felt unsafe. I knew I felt extremely nervous and anxious and uncomfortable and sick to my stomach. I mean, what was I really going? And I'm not even just talking about not being able to enjoy them. I didn't need to enjoy them, but what was I really able to take in as far as what I was learning and what I really needed to learn to be a better driver? So having that own personal experience, I think, helps me when I think about, yeah, I've said to different, like the private swim instructor that we had for a little bit, I won't get into it, Haley, but what you were sharing, Haley, about the homeschool group with the swim lessons, we had a similar experience with a private swim instructor, and it was great because it was just, I was able to kind of be like, I know you're used to parents probably being like, push them, push them, push them. If you push mine too much, he won't come anymore. And I'm very happy for him to just enjoy this time with you, feel safe with you in the water, because he is learning when he's in there with you and you're giving him little things here and there. But I think some parents just don't know that, because they think the parents have good intentions and they think they're doing what's right, but they don't realize that whole nervous system and that regulation that we need to feel safe so that the rest of our brain is available to learn what we're all wanting them to learn, whatever it is.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for segueing into driving, Ashley, because I kind of forgot and I really wanted to talk about driving. And before I kind of talk about my experience or my family's experience, I just wanted to say too that idea that you made, I think you made a comment, maybe you could have switched instructors, but you didn't know whether you could or not. And I think those are even some of the pieces. Like, it doesn't have to be driving lessons or no driving lessons. You can like work within that. And I think so often we think we have to accept something as a full package deal. And maybe there's room to move a little bit there, that, maybe a family does decide that driving lessons are the best way, or maybe a child really wants to take them, but that doesn't mean that it has to be just that driver. Now, it's never easy to make those switches. I'm not saying it's like a quick fix, but just even imagining that we might be able to think about that a little bit, and that it just might not be a fit, because of course it makes sense. We know that anything we do in life, we sometimes are fit with somebody and sometimes we're not. I mean, we even know that from our own time in school. We probably had teachers that we felt really got us and were a good match for our learning style, and others that didn't. But I think sometimes, just thinking this through in this way, sometimes these kind of lessons experiences can almost feel more schoolish. Like, I know lots of people that have, whether the schools want them to or not, talked about whether a teacher's a match for their child or whatever. I know that's not usually a popular thing, but I do know lots of people who have done that. But I don't know very many people who have done that with, like, driving instructors or hockey coaches or dance instructors. It's funny, we kind of think you sign up for this and this is what it is. But no, I just wanted to say that the other piece that really kind of tweaked me thinking about this topic the last little while is that, so for us, we didn't do driving lessons. My husband and I kind of worked with the kids, and we just did a lot of family practice, a lot of family practice, especially with my one child. And I had assumed my kids would do driving lessons, because most people do, whether they do private ones or the high school I went to, there were lessons offered through there was kind of like a driving school that came into the school. So I think that most kids that I know do driving lessons, but it was really my husband. He said, well, why would we do driving lessons? And I said, well, how did you learn to drive? My father. And he just said it so matter of factly. And I said, well, didn't you want to do driving lessons? Well, why would I? My father never had an accident. He was a good driver. Why would we do? Right. And so sometimes it only takes that one person going, but why? And a big part of the why here is that kind of word on the street is that your insurance rates will be a lot lower if you take driving lessons. But again, I would encourage people to think that through a little bit, because in researching it really wasn't, my husband and I have been with the same company for years, and they were quite happy to offer our kids a good rate to get insured. So again, we hear these narratives and it's like, actually, they offered a really good rate. This is a little bit of a funny story. They offered a good rate, and my incredibly self-directed child, the one who decided at 11 to swim, he came running into the house from somewhere to grab something and went to hop in his car. He had already purchased, he had bought 2 cars by the time he got his full license. That's a whole other story, I tell you him. But anyway, he came running in and I said, why are you leaving in your car? It's not insured yet. And he said, no, it is. It is. I just ran down to the office and I've got it all sorted out. And I said, but Dad just got you a really good rate with our company. He goes, I know, but this other company bettered it. So we were like, oh, okay. So I just feel like we can get caught in these, like, we have to do this because of this. And sometimes it's not even the case. If you're willing to talk to people or, kind of navigate a little bit, it's not even always the case. But when my youngest son went to get his driver's license, he was extremely comfortable by the time he went for his tests. Like, he was just a really solid, comfortable driver. And they hadn't gotten very far into the test. And the instructor said, wow, he said, you've definitely taken some good lessons and had lots of practice. And he said, where did you go to driving school? And my son said, oh, I didn't. And the driving instructor was, what? You didn't take lessons? And my son said, no. Well, how did you learn? And he said, oh, my parents taught me. And so the instructor said, oh, are they teachers? Which I thought was funny, because I don't even think he was asking if we were driving instructors. I think he was literally asking us if we were teachers. So I find it funny because that label comes up all the time. Oh, are you a teacher? Well, then you. But it was just the funniest thing, because he had just really practiced, and he was just ready. We didn't do anything super fancy, but I think that when you have spent this much time facilitating and supporting your children's learning, it's just another thing, right? And not everybody's going to be comfortable with teaching driving. Like, I'm not suggesting that that's what every family needs to do, but it was just fascinating to me how quickly I assumed we had to do lessons, and how quickly my husband was just like, but why? And how quickly the instructor just immediately went to assuming that we must be some sort of certified something or others. But if you think about it, there's all kinds of safety related things that kids learn from their parents around home repair, around cooking, around mowing the lawn. Like, there's lots of things that could have safety things that we do pass on to our kids, or that they learn from us. And it doesn't always work out perfectly. It took my daughter a lot longer to get comfortable with driving. And she passed fine. I don't think anybody said, wow, you've had fantastic lessons. She's just not as comfortable on the road. So I don't mean to suggest that it's superior, but it's just been interesting to see that something that I never considered is actually doable, and not such a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
Well, I was just going to quickly say, as someone who did go through to get a teaching degree and who has spent time teaching, not just only in school, but I did a number of years of teaching dance classes as well. And it always does surprise me that I always think, like, what do you think these experts or these teachers have? Because yeah, if you know how to swim, or if you know how to drive, or even if you don't know how to dance, you can learn together. Like, yes, it's great, and some people prefer a teacher, but we do teach our kids lots of different things. Like you said, Erin, like cooking's a good example, right? And it's usually just by doing it together. It's not through like practicing driving together might feel a little bit more like a lesson. I could see how that could go that way a little bit more, and cooking could too, I guess. But like, lots of times it's just doing those things together. Yeah, I'm just thinking back to, I was in teachers college. My teaching program was like 10 months long. I didn't, it's longer now where I live. It's a couple years, but I don't know, when people say the same thing, right? Like, oh, you're homeschooling, and then they find out, and I know I've said this here before, like they'll find out I'm a teacher, and right away, pretty much everyone goes, oh, that's why you're able to homeschool. And I'm just like, no, it's really not. But my kids are also showing me too that, which is like, so I still need these reminders absolutely on a regular basis, where, I said to my youngest, like, do you want to sign up for soccer this year? Do you want to sign up for baseball this summer? And because I see there's that interest and comfort level around those skills as well. And he's just kind of reminding me, he doesn't have to sign up for something. He doesn't have to have a coach to play soccer, to learn how to play baseball. He'll say, can't we just go over to the, like, we live across the street from our park and there's 3 baseball diamonds. Can't we just go over there? Like, we have a baseball bat, we have our baseball glove. And again, like what we're saying, there's nothing wrong with signing up for those things, but my guys are reminding me that, like, that's just one way of doing it. And I mean, I hope they continue to feel that way so that they know whenever they are interested in learning something that those options are available, but it certainly isn't the only way, and there's other ways to figure it out. And actually, the last thing I'll say is a conversation I had with my youngest. So he's going to be 8 next month, so pretty young. But he said to me the other day, well, how old were you when you, I think he just asked when I had signed up for something like kind of extracurricular activities. And I said, well, other than dance, because I was put in dance classes at a very young age. I didn't start soccer. I didn't start basketball until I was older than he was, but I kind of needed him to ask me that question. And I think, again, going back to what we were saying before, I think it's because I feel like we're surrounded by people who have had their kids in structured activities, and they're asking me and asking my kids directly, what are you, I don't think they asked the question like, what are you signed up for, but essentially like, what are you doing? Like, what do you go and play? Like, what sports are you into? And they don't know how to respond when my kids right now say nothing. And as a parent, I'm kind of like, oh, is that bad? And I'm like, no, it's not bad. It's okay. But it kind of feels like, yeah, there's this expectation that, well, how are they going to learn? And isn't it really good that they're involved in these things? And it can be 100%. And I'm sure they will go in and out of things. But yeah, I appreciate them reminding me that they can do these things and they can learn these things without having an expert teacher or structured lessons or like coaching sessions and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's some value sometimes just to the social aspect for kids. Like maybe I've had my kids want to do things. It's not really that they're desperate to learn that particular skill, but maybe they have some friends doing it, and so it's worth it to them to have that camaraderie. So I do feel like it's not, yeah, there can be different reasons for doing things, but it's the expectation, right? And the surprise if they're not. Yeah. And there are definitely things that I see other families doing naturally that I don't feel as, like even, my daughter's interest in creating and crafting and doing art crafts. I could not, we certainly did some interesting things, but she really appreciated going to somewhere where she could get a level of instruction that I probably could have. I mean, yes, I sourced some things out. We did some things, but I don't think we need to feel any kind of guilt if there are things we want to outsource. It's just more the assumption, right? That we need to. And I even think of things like as my kids got older, there are a lot of different businesses or just organizations that will do like a resume would be an example. This idea that you kind of have to outsource getting your resume done, but we actually had a pretty good time developing a resume because it was kind of fun just to look at all the different things and figure out how to put those things together. But again, that would be one that, I mean, I'm not great at things like design. Like, my husband and daughter were really good at that piece, and I could kind of help with some of the wording and ideas. And so it's not really just about one parent having to be an expert on something. I think so often it's like learning how to do things by utilizing the natural skills of the people around you. Not that you as the parent have to be an expert, but just that more organic kind of way of doing things. But yeah, I don't know. Do we have anything else? Do either of you have anything else coming to mind, or?
I mean, I'll just quickly add in, Erin, what you were just saying there is, it made me think, because that's what the real world is like, right? Like, other than when you're in school or in lesson, some type of structured activity, that's not really how you learn outside of that. When you want to learn something, you get it from lots of different places and lots of different people, or YouTube, or like we said, sometimes you do get a teacher maybe. But I'm just thinking, like, in the workplace, right? If you need help learning how to do a specific thing related to your job, you need to have that ability to know where to go and how to figure it out, not on your own. You need, that's part of it, is thinking about that on yourself. Is like, okay, who's the right person to go ask about this? Or, what source can I pull from to figure this out? So I just wanted to quickly add that in when you were saying that, Erin, that there's skill building in that and confidence building in that, knowing that when you are interested or need to learn something new, we don't typically go get a teacher as an adult. That's just one option we use sometimes. Lots of times we figure it out in a lot of different ways. So it's good to start doing that younger, I think, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just, sorry, one more thing from what you just said there, Ashley, when we talk about sort of like, I don't know if you use the word, the real world, but that idea of like, how do people naturally do these things in life? I would also say that, when my kids have done things like applied for jobs, a lot of the stuff that I was nervous about because it didn't look as official enough was either not an issue or actually appreciated. Like I remember when my one son was applying for his first job, and a couple of the things on his resume that I was kind of the most about, I mean, one, the fact that he'd been homeschooled, that was obviously a big, you kind of think, how is that going to be perceived? And the other actually was that a big part of his time had been spent, my kids had these like multiple paper routes that essentially became family paper routes because everybody was kind of trying to figure out how to get, things scheduled with the different routes. And we had gotten some flack at times, not most people were extremely positive, but a few times people would make comments like, whose paper route is this anyway? Shouldn't they be taking responsibility for their own route, whatever? So those things that I kind of had at times wondered about actually ended up being things that were seen very positively. So when he got called in for his second interview, which he thought was his second interview, and actually it was the job offer. And I believe that the manager said, so first of all, you've got the job. And he said, so just wanted to let you know that. He said, I mean, you were homeschooled and we like people that do things a bit differently. And it was like, that was just so funny because that was one of and he said, and the other thing, like just, all these years with this paper route, and obviously you're able to collaborate because you were working with your family and you would have been like just naturally dealing with customers. So he said, I think those two things alone. And it was so funny because those were the two things that I thought, oh, these don't look very, official or very whatever, but in the, I'm doing my air quotes here, in the real world, that those actually are some of the things that when you're actually looking at wanting to engage with somebody practically, those are things that are appreciated. So it doesn't always have to be, the official school of whatever or lessons or Okay, so that was it for me. So, thank you so much. And I guess we will, you will hear from us another time with some other topics. And then in the meantime, we would love, if you have a chance, if you're listening and have a chance to leave a review or a rating, that would be really helpful. And also just a friendly reminder that we have a donate button on the podcast page. It's not too far down. I believe it says, we appreciate you for appreciating us. So that would also be lovely if you have a chance to do that. And until next time, we'll just see you both later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And this ends our conversation today. We hope you found it interesting and maybe helpful. If you'd like to connect further or see additional content, Haley can be found on the web and on Instagram at Taking a Kinder Path. I, Erin, can be found at Everlearning, and Ashley can be found on Instagram at Ashley as Mama and Storytime Shelves. We'd be very grateful if you'd share this conversation with anyone you think might appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.